There you go.
Okay. Correction, Matt and Pat. The Matt and Pat show.
We're tag teaming here.
So I'll let Pat go ahead and start out with...
Okay. Good morning. Thanks for having us here. I'm not sure if we're the exciting or the scary or keep everyone on the right path. We will do our best to share with you what we know. There is a lot of information that we'd like to have the answers to that would be helpful for you. First of all, I'm Pat King. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Standards and Assessment. Our role is to develop items and tests in alignment with state standards and to cover test administration and reporting.
And
Matt?
I am Matt Ayotte, and I know a lot of you from my experience in working throughout the state for the last, 15 years in education. Some as a district person, some as a vendor, and now as a state employee. Really look forward to helping you get some guidance for as we go toward the online testing. Really look forward to this new exciting year. And as Pat will probably mention, the future is kind of blurry, and we'll try to help you get through the fog as much as possible as we go forward.
You'll go to the next slide. So there are some things we mentioned we would talk about this morning. So some things we can tell you that are, to the best we have, I'll say set in play. We don't do anything set in stone. We know that we are moving summative assessments to spring testing, so there's no longer a fall meet as your districts have been used to. We know that we're moving in the direction of online testing, and that's why it's so critical for us to be able to meet with all of you, because I think you're our conduit to help the districts implement that. We also know that the tests we administer will be aligned to state standards. So those are three things that are a given, and we'll try and keep information flowing to you and your districts the best that we can as we become aware of what's constant. So this morning we will cover the transition to spring for summative testing, the transition to the online test delivery, technology-enhanced items. That's something we've been doing. Michigan has our own item bank process that a lot of Michigan teachers have been involved in helping to develop our items. We have a process that's an online through the web where they come in for training and they actually create items. Up to this point, we have predominantly been multiple choice constructed response, which many of you are familiar with. Our new foray is into technology-enhanced items. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, show some examples, and what you can do to help prepare your schools and districts, teachers and students to get ready for online testing. Some of the lessons we've learned from the pilots that we've been administering, some of the accessibility options that we'll have with online delivery mode that we didn't have with paper pencil, and our movement into online reporting to make data more accessible, more readily available, a faster timeline.
And so before we really start, those are the things we want to get to. We want to make sure that this session is, we cover what you're looking for. So if you have questions and so forth, we want to hear those. But first we have some questions of you. I believe the URL, am I correct in saying that the URL for the Poll Anywhere is listed on that location? But if you don't have that, we can give it to you. Does everybody have access to that and can get to it? Because I'm going to need you to go there and answer some questions for us, and we can kind of gauge. Some of you have already started. All right. So the first poll question, if you go to this URL, if you don't have it, it's right there, polleb.com/MattAyotte877. And so the first question is this: are you aware of any district in your region that participated in the spring interim assessment pilot? Narrowing the focus. Some of you say, oh, we did the Smarter Balance field test. That's fine. I'm interested in the interim at this point in time. So go ahead and, a lot of yeses. So you can see a lot of people did participate. That does kind of back up what we've seen. The participation numbers were extremely high, and we'll show you a little bit later about how that worked out. Okay. We'll leave it open for a couple seconds. So what I what I gather from this is that you're all connected with the schools and you know what's going on and you really are involved at some point and at some level with the participation. So the next question is, were you involved in helping your schools prepare for the online pilot? Getting you into, how much were you in there with the school, getting them prepared, not only technology-wise, but teachers, maybe even helping, PD together, some ideas for preparing students for the online testing. Trig would apply to this. So directly involved with the schools.
And when you're referencing trig, are you referencing purchasing equipment or professional development?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. All right. So many of you, almost maybe at least a third of you, was in there and helping. That's really great because that means you have really good experience firsthand with getting prepared.
This is also helpful for us to know where we need to target some different communications and ways that we can help you be helpful to your schools and districts.
Of you that said no, how many of you wished you were involved in helping your schools prepare? Okay. Some of you don't feel that that's your role. That's fine. I'm just curious as to those of you. Sometimes the communication gap is a problem, and so making sure everybody's communicating and getting the right information to be able to help. Okay? All right, so okay, so the first question I have around this is internet capacity, bandwidth. In your opinion, how big of an issue is this for your schools in your area? Low, medium, high. I was going to add another one called red hot, burning fire, huge importance. But left it to high just to put all those in one bucket. Okay, this is perception. It might not be reality. We all know this, right? It's just your perception, and it looks like we're making some improvements on the bandwidth issue and concern. Does that kind of sound like that's the progress we're making as we get regions and get some of the connectivity issues solved? We have heard of some schools, districts that have used TRIG funds to really maximize their bandwidth and increase their bandwidth capacity. By, in one case, fourfold, and so that's really encouraging to see. Multiplying it by 4 with the same cost. Anybody else? Anybody have a testimonial that they want to share similar to that, or
I've got comments.
Comments about that?
Comments about in my region, I'm aware of all interim testing that would have happened. I'm the tech director, so we had more. We didn't. Even our smallest district with the lowest amount of bandwidth, which is a T1, and they call me almost every week complaining about their bandwidth. They successfully tested. The only problem that they had with testing was the test site manager server wasn't set up. Well, it was set up correctly, but it wasn't turned on when they went to give the test. So, and then the other one was the sound wasn't turned on on the testing computers before for the K1 too.
A couple logistical things that they've learned.
Our problems weren't with bandwidth, even though we've got
T1
that have really horrible bandwidth.
Okay, all right.
But even they were able to successfully.
Yeah, they successfully tested once they overcame the logistical issues. Bandwidth wasn't an issue.
That's helpful feedback for us to have.
So the next question. Again, trying to get some of your feedback and perception around number of devices. Okay, are schools really lacking devices? In your opinion, is this an issue that schools are scrambling to meet? Now, I know there's a lot of schools going to one-to-one initiatives and so forth, which is great. And you know from M-TRACS, I think most of you are familiar with M-TRACS. Raise your hand if you're familiar with M-TRACS, if you've ever heard of it before. Everybody has. So as you know, most schools, I guess 79% of the schools in the state are minimally prepared to do the testing with what they have. And hopefully after the summer purchasing, that will go higher. Okay, so that's a medium level concern.
How many of you would change your response if iPad and Chromebooks were in availability with what you were delivering?
So if they weren't?
If they were.
If they were?
As we go forward.
Okay.
So they may be basing this on what was.
Okay, so making sure that we're keeping in mind all the Chromebooks and iPads and everything, support for all those devices is there for online testing. So with that assumption, does that change the answer? I think you could probably change your answer on your screen, but okay. Any comments around that? Questions? Testimonials? Okay. The next question I'm going to ask you is the issues that come up. With paper and pencil testing, you don't have a lot of technical issues that you have to face. Once you introduce that aspect of computers, electricity, how much of a concern is the technology issues during testing? How much is that, in your opinion, a concern? All right. Nobody says it's a low issue. It's definitely an issue to be dealt with.
And is this predominantly because of conflict with instructional use versus having availability for assessments, or just not having sufficient machines and lab time, or are we doing that?
I think to a certain extent it's not having sufficient technical support if there is a chance.
Okay.
Okay.
And what we're seeing here is a little bit of a paradigm shift. So before I went to the state, I worked in a local district and responsible for assessments. And so a huge piece of getting ready for assessments was all the materials coming in and distribution and collection. All of a sudden what we're seeing is a shift. It's no longer the paper that's coming in. It's now, as you mentioned, Daryl, it's now within schools and districts getting their technology ready and making sure it's available so there are no glitches about the time the student's ready to log on. So it's a little bit of a shift of where we need those resources for assessments.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
You got teacher technology skills though too that you would be concerned about. I mean, you got a lot of teachers out there that are barely able to log into their email.
Okay.
And they're going to troubleshoot a lab with all these kids taking the test? Really?
So it's having the technical resources available at time of testing, not just getting them ready, but at time of testing.
The third piece is the student technology skills. We've seen some districts cut back on keyboarding and, kids not knowing how to use scroll bars or not, those kind of things where the kids are hindered to take the test and show their content knowledge because they don't know how to navigate the system.
Okay.
So that's another issue.
Okay.
That's a good point to raise, Hillary. So,
That's actually the next question, I believe. So that's a good segue.
The nature of it, it's a very stressful,
Right.
potential time.
All they had to do was show them how to bubble in the bottom, and have a sample. I remember the sample of the filled-in bubble.
yes.
Fill in the bubble, and the teacher would go around and make sure that the bubble was filled in properly. Okay, you know how to fill in the bubble.
So it's that transition from how you made the students comfortable for paper pencil, and now as we move to the online delivery, getting that same capability, but knowing that your teachers are as comfortable with that test administration goal.
It's a change. It's a shift. I remember back when I was with Grand Ledge, as tech director, when there was MEP testing, I didn't have to worry about it. They just did it, right? Well, guess what? No more. The tech director, as you know, is being relied upon, and a lot. And so I'd be curious to know how districts are handling that issue, in terms of resources.
Is there a possibility of having a practice day?
It's Mike. Mike
Yeah.
asked the question about a possibility of a practice day. I think
practice
that
day.
we'll cover a little bit later. I think it's a valid piece to bring up.
We are actually going to cover that. That's one of the issues, key critical points of success. We want to make sure everybody's successful and giving an opportunity for systems to be checked.
Just a comment, as you said, now it's a tech director's issue. As we move to more centralization of support services and things like that, we have districts that only have on-site tech support 1 day a week. And now when we have a short testing window, everybody wants that 1 day a week to be 5 days a week for the testing window.
Yeah.
We just don't have the staff in place to do that.
Wow.
We do a lot with remote support and things like that, that then you can't really use during the testing. So there's some logistical issues there with expecting a technology director to be available in districts that didn't happen.
Right.
So a key takeaway for us is to be able to, instead of having the responsibility lie with the tech director, be able to have the training to reach out for whomever's proctoring those test sessions, be able to have enough familiarity to do the administration without the tech director having to be
With the
there.
ability for us to be able to provide tech support to them remotely instead of physically improved.
Well, that's true.
We have is districts that have 4 layouts, and they've got one person, and they can't see all 4 rooms at the same time.
Well, also, I think an important aspect that we need to consider is when we develop procedures, testing procedures for, like, in the event that XYZ event happens, like the mouse stops working or whatever fill-in-the-blank technology issue you might have in a computer lab. What do you do? The more we keep that particular issue in mind, that maybe they don't have a tech person waiting to just, on the beck and call, fix that issue. So let's not assume that. Let's have a policy that would help people know that they can actually continue testing without the support of a tech person. Does that make sense? I think those are things that really key takeaway for me. But that may have logistical impacts, but it's one of those things. Maybe you don't fill the lab. For example, this room here, we're filled to capacity. Maybe over capacity, I don't know. But, if one device broke, that you wouldn't have anywhere to put the student, right? And you have to kind of figure that out. How many devices do you need to have extra in order to have successful testing? We're getting ahead of ourselves, but these are conversations that are great to have, and we're having them internally, and we like to have these with you as well. So this is great conversations. Yeah.
One of the things that we would say is that when we talk about pilot testing and we talk about field testing, part of it is to see the validity of our items, but the biggest part of that is to have the pilot and field testing experience with the test delivery so that the types of administration questions that you're encountering, we're encountering those when it doesn't count for the student, when it's not high pressure, not high stakes, doesn't matter. It helps us to experience out. We need to think about what we need to do in that instance. So the more participation we get during those pilot and field test experiences, the better we're able to serve you by thinking and planning ahead for what to do in those instances so it doesn't require your tech directors to be in those rooms at the time testing is going on.
Okay, just a couple more questions. Wrapping that up. By the way, this is rare for us to be able to get a group of like you here in one room, be able to get information. I think it would be really unfortunate if it was one-way communication here. So both ways is going to help everybody. Buy-in, school buy-in. Now, some of these pilots and field test opportunities, some of the schools perhaps didn't really believe in the benefit of participating in these opportunities. So, in the case of the pilots, how many of you think that was an issue and why maybe some of your schools didn't participate? They just didn't buy into that particular, the need for a pilot. We were just talking about testing, test driving the system, test driving logistics. Some schools have been doing online testing for years, and we know what we're doing, and we don't need to really do any additional preparation. I've heard that from some schools, and that may be true.
How many of you expected you were going to be taking an assessment when you walked in? I just realized we're really pummeling the questions at you here, but it's helping us to get some feedback, to know that we're doing in the right direction.
All right, so
That would have been an interesting question they asked before and after the pilot, because I think the districts that
Okay.
Not a good thing.
So even though things may have changed with technology or the online delivery vendor, one bad experience is enough to have them not want to look or reopen the book. Okay.
Soured them on it.
Sourdough. We are going to talk the lessons learned aspect that Pat mentioned. We're going to definitely focus on what we learned. We received a significant amount of feedback from the schools, so we'll definitely speak to some of the things some of the big drawaways that we got from that. So, in this question is if you looked at all those things that we just talked about, which one is the biggest concern if you had to rank it? What's the number one rises to the top? It's going to be a draw. I can see it now. It's going to be a tight one. Well, okay, student technology skills. I should have expected that with the PD group here. So.
But that's key information
Yep.
for us to take back, and something that we hope will be your takeaway when we finish this today. Something for us at the department. We talk about testing and testing devices. The last thing we want to have happen is that the first time the student encounters sitting in front of that device is at the time they're taking a test.
Right.
So in the same way that when we did paper pencil testing and we had accommodated formats available, the one requirement was always this must be the way their instruction's delivered, because you don't want them experiencing something new for the first time when they're taking a test, because then we're no longer assessing what the student knows and is able to do content-wise. We're now assessing what's their familiarity with the device they're testing on. So one of the key takeaways should be that whatever you're purchasing and whatever you're using these devices for, they should be used for delivering instruction in your schools, so that when it comes time to take the test, it's just second nature to the student, and it's sitting down in front of a device they've been using in the classroom, and it's not something new for them. Yes?
I don't know where this would fall. It's not a technology skill-related question, but how do you prepare students on interpreting what they see on the screen and then processing that? For example, elementary math students, and I've had first-hand experience with my child and his friends taking the online test, NWEA. They see double-digit addition, subtraction on screen, and don't know what to do. No one's taught them that they could use a pencil paper for writing the problem down, and they think they have to do it in their heads, so they're just guessing or trying to mentally borrow, take away, and that's a part of skill for a second, third grader. And talk about double-digit addition, multiplication, division. So that's one thing, and then the other is, what if we are teaching them that you can take what's on the screen, write it on paper, but then how do we show them that you've got to line the numbers up now? So now, not only are we talking about a technology question, but we're talking about interpreting what's on the screen and putting it on paper properly.
I'm walking back up to the front, so I'm back closer to the camera.
Okay.
One thing I will preface is any information we're sharing will be tied to what would be state assessments. One of the things you heard me mention is the creation of the items and the creation of the test forms. Part of what we look at when we're doing creation of an item is how that is student-facing and how the student will interact. So we can't really speak to external products. And one of the things that you just mentioned is something that would be a little different than what we'd be expecting to happen in a second grade math assessment. So you raised a question that's probably a very valid question. The reference for whether there's paper pencil or a scratch pad would be part of the test administration rules. Certainly when we get into summative assessments where they're more high stake, if there's allowed to have paper pencil in the room, it's something that has to be collected and distributed there. So it's part of an administration and reporting rule. But you bring a very valid concern, but I'm going to bring us back to focus on what we do with state assessments, because we can't validate what external products would use.
Concepts are there.
The type of thing you just mentioned is not likely to be something we would do, and we'll get into that with second grade math examples. So.
Okay, so let's go ahead and launch into
Will do.
the near future.
The near future. So assessments as we know it today for the summative assessments, which, if you think in terms of our general assessments, what you've known as MEP or MME, or alternate assessment, the MyAccess, and then we've had our English language assessment, which moved from ELPA to WIDA. Those are our statewide assessments. And so any of our discussion here will reference what we're doing with statewide assessments. We'll also talk about our interim assessments in a little bit. But right now for the summative, which are the high stakes, moving to online delivery, away from the paper pencil. Since that will be in the spring, there is no required testing in fall. So that's a big shift for your schools. They're not coming back and starting to think
I don't hear any cheers on that.
They know that there will be pilot and field tests in the fall. But our spring testing will be the summative assessments. The other shift is that will now be at grade level. So I don't know how much you've been involved with your schools and the assessments prior to moving online, but when they tested in the fall, they were actually testing on the standards for what they learned in the previous year. So then you also have what they retained over the summer. That's a little bit of a factor there. So this will mean that now they'll be testing toward the end of the year based on content they've learned during that school year. So we think that will be a benefit for our schools moving forward. The English Language Arts assessments will be grades 3 through 8 and 11. It's just that now they're going to be assessed on the standards they've always had. Paper pencils. Third graders used to have the what we'll call a consumable booklet where they actually bubbled in the test booklet, but it was on second grade standards. Now that they're testing at the end of third grade, if they were to do a paper pencil form, it would not be the consumable booklet. It would be a paper answer document, because they're really the same as what would have been those entering fourth graders the following year. Mathematics also will be grades 3 through 8 and 11. Every grade level will have math and ELA. Science, which used to be 5, 8, and 11, now that it's at the end of the school year, will be 4, 7, and 11. Same standards we've always assessed them on. It's just that moving to spring, it's in a different grade level that it's administered. And social studies, instead of 6, 9, and 11, will be 5, 8, and 11. The other shift that means is the school building, most likely that these students are being assessed in. Ninth graders were in your high school building, eighth graders will be in the middle school. Any questions about the spring administration? Yes?
I think this is true, but I wasn't quite sure. All of these are set to be done in the same testing window.
We're going to talk about
that's the next slide. Yeah.
You guys are doing a good segue, and it helps us to know we're all thinking through the same process. So.
Did you want to address the? Did you want to address the three things that?
Oh,
3
we
points.
did.
We did already. Okay. I must not have been hurrying.
Okay, so we just
Was there
have
a
the
question
about the test windows. So this was published. I don't know how many of you received or were aware of the publication the Department of Ed Standards and Assessment Office put out early April. April 2nd. We don't put anything out April 1st. So.
How many of you have seen this? How many of you have seen this? The screen, this chart. Okay. Third.
And it is out there on the web. It's probably going to get revised and changed. Not what you see here necessarily, but from what was there April 2nd, this is already a change. Part of it was the online delivery. I think back in April we talked about the possibility of moving our alternate assessments to DLM consortium. Since that time we've determined they're not ready, not to what we think would be ready for a high-stakes summative assessment. So we'll be remaining with our MyAccess alternate assessment. They also didn't offer any option for paper pencils at this point in time. With our summative assessments, while we're geared to move to online delivery, we know that we need to make it available to all students, and there will be some students that won't have access or won't be able to take online delivery. So it's critical that every assessment we offer for summative must also be available paper pencil. That doesn't mean that your schools and districts will have the choice of are we doing online or paper pencil. It's based on if we have areas that truly are not ready to do an online delivery, or if we have individual students who have some type of accommodation or accessibility feature that doesn't permit them to test online.
And yes, we have to define what ready means. That's a really a sticky point to kind of think about all the aspects that we talked about earlier. All go into readiness. Bandwidth, students, everything.
But you should think in terms of getting your schools and districts ready that they would all be able to test online. That's the direction you should be moving. So the windows that you see here, there were some factors that went into where do we set the assessment windows. And we know that high school needed to be within the last 7 weeks of the school year. And for the others, it could be up to within the last 12 weeks of the school year. But as we looked at that, the first thought was everyone's going to want to have as much instructional time as possible before they deliver the assessment. We know that there's pending legislation that all third graders must pass the reading test in order to move to the next grade. So that's very high stakes. We know that there are issues with, if your schools and districts were to choose when they were going to administer, they want everybody to take it at the last possible time to get as much instructional impact. So the first thing that would do for you is to have everybody trying to use your labs or your devices all in the same time frame, bandwidth all in the same time frame, that no matter what we're able to support from the testing company, your own schools and districts are not going to be able to all fit in that one pipeline. So based on that, we took grades 3 and 6 and said those two grade levels are both taking just ELA and math. They don't have a third assessment. And because of the third grade pending legislation, we put them to the very far end of the window, which puts them beginning the week of May 18th, and it does take it after Memorial Day, but it's a 3-week window. They're taking 2 assessments, and so typically, and I think we had a slide at one point of how much testing time that was per student.
We did have that, but yeah, we didn't.
Do you recall what that was?
For third grade?
Mm-hmm. It was probably less than 8 hours, right?
Absolutely less than 8 hours, a lot less.
So I guess what I'm looking at is it's a 3-week window. If you took all of your third graders, they're not testing for 3 weeks. You've got a 3-week window in which to get everybody in through the system. And typically your third graders and your sixth graders are going to be in 2 different buildings, so we thought that might help from a building perspective. So you have a 3-week window. They can test anywhere within that 3-week window, so your schools and districts have some flexibility with scheduling their students. From a state perspective, we would strongly encourage you to have them test toward the front end of their window. Reason being, you get absenteeism, you get things that happen in your schools that if you leave that last week for emergency situations, then you don't have everybody waiting till the last week for a scheduled time and then their students aren't there. And again, the summative assessments count toward your schools and districts' accountability. You don't want them being in that position where something happens and there's no time to recover from it. So we put 3rd and 6th grade in those last 3 weeks. And then we said, okay, now let's take our 4th and 7th graders and we'll take the 3 weeks prior to that. They'll have math and ELA and also the science test. So the same type of thing. And then we took the 5th and 8th graders who will have ELA, math, and social studies. We didn't make them a distinct 3-week window because we're going to hit spring break for most schools and districts, and so we effectively have reduced them down to 2 weeks instead of 3. So we do have a 1-week overlap in there, that week of 4/27, that you could potentially have your 4th and 5th graders, your 7th and 8th graders all trying to test, so you've got 4 grade levels in there. The issue is if we have our 5th and 8th graders start in the first weeks of the window, they should be predominantly done by that time frame. So it should still reduce, but it allows some time if you have kids who are absent, who needed to be in there. So that takes care of the grades 3 through 8. Any questions about some of the rationale or other factors that we need to consider when we think about when those students would test?
Just my own ignorance on this, will they be able to just do it any day they want, or do they have to pre-schedule it with you? Or
It does not
else,
have to be pre-scheduled.
No, we're not
The
at this
question
point.
was, does it have to be pre-scheduled? So we may, when it comes closer to testing, I don't know how we'll work that out as far as asking. I think previously when we said if you can tell us when your schools and districts are testing, it would be helpful for us to know. But we're also recognizing that that it wasn't always consistent, and people are doing their best guesstimate, or they
Right.
didn't know it all and we didn't know where they fell. So by putting a 3-week window in there, that truly is to be flexible for the schools and districts. You choose the dates, you choose the times, you schedule the labs. As long as it happens within that 3-week window, then you're covered.
Our expectation is that most testing would occur maybe end of the first week, and then a lot of it will be the second week. I mean, it's like a bell curve. You kind of get started, ramped up, and then the third week would be the taper. So that's kind of what we would expect schools to do in general.
But good question you're raising. Those students who are taking paper pencil will still have designated test dates of when the test must be administered. So there is more flexibility for schools and districts with the online. But we needed to do that in order for you to schedule labs and equipment and around your own classroom assessment schedules.
Yes, we did ask for weeks that you'd be administering the pilots and so forth. That in most cases wasn't followed by schools. It was an idea that was thought of in December that wasn't anywhere close to reality when it came time to administer. So we understand changes happen, things happen, that you need to be flexible, and that's what we're willing to set up a system to support.
From a
Question about that,
Yes.
is the expectation that the student can start and stop tests in the middle, so to speak?
Okay,
So
so the question about students starting and stopping, those will fall within test administration rules. I can tell you and I've kind of come through all the pieces, being in a district that had multiple buildings, and again, that was paper pencil at that time. But then when it came to the state, it started with MEEP and then the MME, which was even more stringent and had more constraints than the MEEP. So we know there are questions we'll get into with administration guidelines. One of the things with high stakes testing, we always need to ensure students are not able to go in and change answers on something. So there will be policies, and it will be part of the administration guideline. If it's something where it's a pause to use the restroom, there will be capability in the administration guidelines on how they do that. But students won't have the capability to take a test, go home, come back the next day and log in and go back and access things they've done previously.
But if they start today and don't have time, they can finish tomorrow, they just can't go back to the items they've already seen?
Those will be in administration guidelines, but typically they need to complete a test session within the time that's there. And we try to keep those test sessions within something that's reasonable amount of time for a student. So most of our online assessments to date, even in piloting, we've done them in 2 sessions so that reasonably they could be about a 40 to 45-minute session. Do it in a class period and not have to have something that overlaps or involves rescheduling classes. Okay. High school, you'll notice, has a 5-week window instead of 3. And that was intentional. It's not because there are more students. It's because, A, they have 4 tests that they have to take. B, we know high schools are also giving AP testing, International Baccalaureate testing. So we're trying to allow more flexibility for the high schools to schedule around those pieces of testing. We know that it's not a fun thing to do. We also recognize that no matter where we put the test window, some people will be happy, some people are going to be unhappy. We're trying to put it as close to the end of the year to allow for maximum amount of instruction that can be there. And we did give the high schools an extra 2 weeks. Something that we'll put out a tentative test delivery schedule for examples for high schools that want to think about how they would do that. For those that have kids taking AP testing, it's typically not all students. So if the class schedules are already disrupted for those kids taking AP, that might be a prime time to have the other students taking the state assessments. When AP testing is done, those students basically are finished with instruction in those classes. Might be a prime time to have them then go and take their testing. So that was the rationale behind the windows that we came up with. And we will, for sure, Robert, address administration policies, but we are trying to keep things within a class session. And typically, do you have classes that run anything under a 50-minute session? Do any of you have schools that have classes that are under that? And Oh.
on half days.
Okay. So you probably wouldn't test on a half day if we had a, but, or you
Actually,
would.
they do.
They do?
And
They
so
schedule
then
half
they,
days on test days,
oh, okay,
and they have
But they
have
expand
longer periods.
okay. So it's not where they're disrupting a class
Right.
period to do it. What we're looking at when we think about how long would it take a typical student to take the test is keeping enough time that they can go in, get logged in, and get set up, as well as taking the assessment questions without having to work into the next class periods. College entrance and work skills. We will have college entrance and work skills, as we always have. Those will be standalone assessments, and they'll be paper pencil based, and most likely in that March window where they used to be, so they won't be part of the online delivery or the spring testing window. And the WIDA assessments also will be paper pencil only, and they are February through the end of March, so that's outside of that testing window. My Access, the alternate assessment, we gave them the full span. They are moving to online, but we've given them the full span that's in there. It's typically a one-on-one administration. Okay?
Okay, so this was the last full slide. Do you want to talk a little bit about the interims, or
Sure.
From after this slide, it'll be mostly me talking. So.
Okay, so the interim assessments is something that's new that Michigan has been developing, and it's to gear it more toward instructional base. It's not quite where formative practices, which are to inform your students on their learning. It's an interim, meaning we get a pre of where they are when they start. We'd like to get to the point where we have an item bank developed that you could administer at midpoints during the year to see are they making progress. At this point, when we first roll these out, it would be a pre and a post. And what we're looking at is for those grade levels where they would be taking a summative assessment, you would not need to administer both the interim and the summative in the same subject area. So this is still in development, but as an example, with our K2, those aren't summative assessments. But in helping to prepare our students to know where they are with their reading so that we don't get to third grade and all of a sudden find out we have students at risk, we have the K2 assessments in the ELA to help us measure where students are at that point in time. The science and social studies are Michigan Merit Curriculum course-based. So instead of having one science test that covers everything like the summative does, we would have an interim assessment in biology, earth science, chemistry, and physics. So they cover a little more depth on those topics to know where your students are.
Question?
Quick question, and I don't know much about this either, but in the interim assessments for English, math, science, could those be used in high school for end of course assessments?
They are going to be optional assessments that the
Right.
state's making available. As far as how they're used, I think we'll probably have to have more discussions at the state level on do we think that that would be sufficient as a standalone, or would there need to be something else the school would use for that end of course or opting out? I think, or maybe.
Well, no, I'm thinking more about, I get a lot of questions about end of course assessments, especially when students are taking online and they want to ensure that they've actually learned something. And I won't go into whether that's appropriate or not, but would these be acceptable for that kind of?
It's something that we'll want to work with the curriculum and instruction office on to see if they feel that that as a standalone would be sufficient. Again, our premise is to make sure that we know where students are at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the course, and getting them prepared to be ready for that end of assessment. And it is something that it's completely optional for schools to use. The state will make it available. At this time, to our knowledge, it would be free. So those schools and districts that are paying for something that they use for educator eval, this would be something that would be made available to schools and districts free as a measure of, could be one measure of student growth. As to whether it as a standalone would suffice for that end of course assessment, I think we'll have to have curriculum instruction office weigh in on that one.
Or the district itself could look at that,
because they need to align it to the course the students actually take, and that's the whole
That's right.
concern I have is really, that's the same thing.
Which is why we're developing the assessments to be Michigan Merit course-based.
Okay. And this chart will give you a depiction of how we've progressed in our pilots. The light blue is the online MEP, which wasn't a pilot really. It was actual operational testing. A lot of schools did participate in it, especially this past year in the fall. And as you can see, we offered science and social studies both, and that greatly improved also the participation. And the pilots, we've had 3 pilots for the interims. This spring, as you can see, we made a big jump in participation, and we're really excited to see that, and looking forward to looking at the data and really making sure Pat's group will be able to look at the data and make sure that the items are measuring. So, thank you for. I mean, a lot of the answers you provided earlier indicated that you saw a lot of participation. This backs it up. A lot of students, a lot of tests administered statewide.
Did you have a question there as to whether they were taking this because they had to pay $10 per student from trade?
I did not ask that question. I did not. Good question. The question is did we ask how many of them were doing it to fulfill the TRIG requirement? And my guess is 90% of them were. We were assuming that, yes.
That was kind of a two-way. That's part of why the TRIG grant was supporting that, because without having schools and districts participate, we don't get that experience of what things do we need to figure out with the online delivery. Are these items valid? And when we get into the lessons learned, there are some pretty significant things that came back to us as feedback.
And as you can see, the previous 2 pilots, the participation level was really low. When you take that and you divide it by all the grade levels and content areas, there were literally just hundreds of tests administered in each content area and grade level, which really isn't enough for us to gauge what the quality of the items, right? So this spring, I think, put us in a good position. So we really needed that in order for this interim assessment to move forward in the plan that we had. Yes?
Sometimes I get confused when I have a name for this. You know, I mean, for a while I was saying, the new Smarter Balance Assessment, and I was like, whoop, erase that. Then I was like, the MEP, nope. Is it online MEP? Is that what we're calling it? What's the
Thank you for asking that question. Our summative testing will be online in spring 2015, aligned to state standards. Use the term summative.
So,
aligned to state standards.
So is there a short name that rolls off the tongue?
Actually, we're working on branding for what this new assessment will be called. That's not quite ready to be rolled out yet, but as soon as it is.
Summative is a single word.
Yes.
One word.
Summative.
Summative.
Okay.
And if you use, so just point out something really good, use the abbreviations for each of those 3 letters.
Summative online.
Okay. There's a question in the...
Okay.
I don't know if you hit on this or not, but will the test that they're taking be accessible?
Align state standards is what she said.
Beth, thank you for that.
Let's not use that one.
So you need to know branding has been a critical issue for the state. The reason is MEP's been with us for 40 years, longer than most people in this room have, unless you took it as students. MEP was never intended to be called MEP. Someone outside the state one day said, oh, Michigan Educational Assessment Programs, that's the MEP, and it stuck. And so we very carefully are looking at branding because it isn't the MEP anymore. But we also need to make sure it isn't duplicating a name of anything that's out there already for Michigan. There are so many programs that have been put out there already. So we're having to avoid anything existing. We're trying to avoid anything that becomes an adverse acronym of what people really think about state assessments. There's a lot of thought going
Yeah.
into that, and we should be able to roll something out before the start of the school year with what the new assessment program would be called. But in the meantime, I was going to say in the interim, please know that what we have are summative tests, which are the high stakes. That's what counts towards your accountability. Summative is administered once a year, and it's to let you know that students have achieved, showing you what they know and can do within their grade level standards. The interim assessments will be a pre and post. They're optional. They're not required. Summative is required for accountability. The interims are optional. They can be used as one measure of student growth. They can be used at the beginning of the school year, or of course to let you know where your students are at that point in time with those standards. And they will cover more in depth the standards within a given content area. Okay, does that help, Andy? And you're asking a very valid question, and we'd love to be able to answer it.
I just want to share these notes with people.
Yep.
I want to say we're talking about the
summative
test.
assessments used for accountability.
Yeah, and please don't make an acronym up, because then it will stick like MEEP did. So there was a question in the back. Let's go ahead and.
I'm not sure if you talked about this or not. The test that's going to be administered in the spring, is it going to work on all devices? Is it going to be accessible for all devices?
All approved devices that are listed on the minimum requirements sheet that we've published, yes.
Which is what?
You don't have access? It's on.
I do, but can you just rattle them off quick? Or?
Okay, yes. Mac and Windows, desktops, laptops, iPads, Chromebooks, Windows 8 tablets. For the spring, I don't know how many of those are out there currently, but I believe the non-touch version, but it's possible that the touch version will be supported. I'll have to confirm that. But nonetheless, iPads and Chromebooks definitely. And we are looking to have some schools participate in the fall field test this coming fall with iPads and Chromebooks. Okay? So if you want to get some experience in administering it with those devices, this fall would be a great opportunity to do that, just for even just one class in your school. It'd be great.
Will the keyboard be for iPads? Is that a requirement, or is it an option?
For any tablet.
It is a requirement, and that remains a requirement for all tablets, for all devices.
And I think
A requirement,
that's
the keyboard is
something-
required. Yeah.
I think that's something that, for summative assessment, that would be true, because we're talking 3 through high school. I think it is a valid question for us to take back for the K2, because if they're able to answer those questions without having access to a keyboard, then
That
that may
might-
remove that requirement.
that-
So that's a very valid question to ask at the K2 level. We know that
Right.
that population is very different, and the way they access and the way they have instruction is very different. And if they're not using an attached keyboard for instruction for K2, then now we're altering what they're getting
Right.
experience and
For the
exposure.
summative assessments, though,
Yes.
the keyboard will be required, because there will be some.
Writing assessment.
Yes, with writing. So it definitely, yes.
And when you're using the Chromes and the iPad, remember that the keyboard takes up a portion of that screen, and so all of a sudden you've impacted what the student's looking at. So always we're trying to look at what is it for the student-facing
Okay.
experience.
Okay. Tina, you had a question?
Where are the items coming from for the summative assessment test? Or who develops the items?
State of Michigan develops the items for state assessments. Okay, so you're asking a question of what's been a topic of great debate out there with Smarter Balance, and that's the reason right now, the only answer I can give you concretely is that we will have online assessments in the spring, and they will be aligned to state standards. I can tell you that science and social studies are totally Michigan developed. It's possible that we will be using math and ELA items that we've developed as well. So
when I get a question from a local that says, oh, it's just going to be the MEEP online, how should I respond to them?
it would be the new MEEP, and that's why we're trying to get away from the term MEEP.
We don't really want to use new MEEP either, but
But basically, MEEP as you've known and as it's existed is no longer. And the reason for that is okay, so the state adopted back in 2010 for ELA and math, adopted Common Core as the state standards. And that's what you've been teaching in your classrooms. MEP items assess some of that, not all of it. So at this point, we know that spring assessments will be aligned to state standards. We can say that. We know that there's an item development process. And if we have time left when Matt goes through some of this and it's valuable for you, I would be happy to share what that item development process is. It's not something we take lightly because these are high stakes. Our kids are measured by them. Our educators will be measured by them. And so there is an involved process for developing those items. So,
Matt, will you be collecting data on the testing device that can be related back to the student outcome to see if there is any relationship? Because I think that's one of the things we need to get past is the concerns over the technology.
So you're saying on every test that's administered, have the device that was used to administer it tracked as well and recorded with that? That's a good question. By the way, is somebody recording some of these questions or all these questions? They're all in here? Okay, so nobody's... Anyway, so that's a question I could probably follow up on later. That's a good idea that we've talked about in the past. I'm not sure what's going to be reality for this next year, but it's definitely something we'd like to do.
if someone will be capturing the specific questions coming up out of this session from the recording and would like to get those forwarded to us, we'd be happy to do an FAQ and get responses back, because they're legitimate questions that you're asking. And as soon as we have concrete answers, we'd love to share them. So.
Like a time frame where we say, like, this is what we have to go with, and when we know, like, what is going to be the definite assessment. I mean, is there a window?
You're asking the same question we ask each and every day. These aren't decisions being made by us. Okay. So
when we talk about future, we're looking at with a zoom lens that really doesn't take us very far. And so we really, about as much as we do in terms of what's going to happen this year.
Students will take a math and an ELA.
Yes, that's exactly what.
Science or social studies, pending what the grade level they're enrolled in. It will be in the spring. It will be available online, and it will be aligned to state standards.
Those are all the facts that you can rest on. Teachers can teach to the Common Core. No,
teachers can teach.
I did not say that.
Standards.
Did not say that. Edit that out. The Michigan standards.
Which is what we've always asked.
I knew it. I knew I'd slip.
So teachers continue to teach to Michigan standards.
Yes.
You'll be fine.
All right. All right.
Pacing, like what is the pace of what the kids should have learned by the time they go take the test? Before, like when they took MEP in the fall, they were being tested on what they should have learned the year before. What are they supposed to have learned? We've got testing windows at various times.
Yes, we
for
do.
various grades. I'm assuming
So,
that
I
grade levels
understand.
pace the same.
So Jason's question, and I'll pick on grades 5 and 8, because
Yes.
5 and 8 have the earliest assessment window. So the question is there something out of that 5th and 8th grade curriculum? What I can speak to with the science and social studies, and so now I have to remember 5 and 8 is social studies as we move forward. Those are elementary, middle school, and high school standards, not specific grade levels, but the math and ELA is in there, and so that's a very legitimate question to take that as we think about what would be expected to be involved in that test.
Okay.
And this may be an uncomfortable one, I understand, but it relates specifically to your last bar of your slide and the fact that we know that not all districts hit the 20%, and some decisions that are still pending, as far as I know, about the $10 per student. If you didn't hit the magic 20%, where do we stand on that?
That's still being reviewed by basically by MDE and the Trig folks. This next week we'll have more answers to that question about where which districts met the 20% requirement and which ones didn't. And so a couple days, this week, I guess. This week, Wednesday is when we're planning to meet and discuss that in more detail.
And I'm sure you've heard this, but my 2 cents, probably a lot of our 2 cents, if they got close, if they made the effort, and someone just...
We definitely are looking for good faith effort. We're looking at that as a big factor. Mm-hmm.
How do we demonstrate effort?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one, and that's really difficult. So those are all things that are being discussed, and definitely, the participation rates were excellent, and we want to give credit to those districts that participated. So, but we have to draw a line somewhere. We can't just say everybody met the requirement because they had one student test. We got to have some sort of line. So we're trying to determine that, and we have agreement upon where that's pretty much going to be at, but we're still looking at it. You probably already know the email that was sent out, and we're looking at more information to kind of help us understand technical issues that may have been faced that we did not get notified. And by the way, when you do face technology issues, the first thing to do is to let us know, and so that we can mark it down and document that. We don't want anything to go undetected at our level, especially when it comes to the summative testing in the spring. We want to be very much aware. And if I need to come and physically, visit you and help you, and we're willing to do that to get to the bottom of helping your schools test.
Again, everything that we're doing in the field testing and the pilot testing, it's not just about the items. It's also about that delivery experience, and we would much rather encounter these issues when it doesn't affect the student. As soon as we hit spring summative, it counts, it matters. So we'd like to encounter those issues beforehand. I wanted to just respond on a flip side to the question you asked. For those schools and districts that did make sacrifices to make sure that they met the goal, there's a fairness issue there too, that if they put out the effort and did something, we want to know that it's not just it doesn't matter if you apply or not.
Right. I definitely agree. I mean, if you're
right.
at 0%, you made no effort, you deserve $0. But if X, Y, Z happened and you tried, and it just,
right.
That's part of it being a pilot. Sometimes it's failures.
That's right. That's right. And we did get notified that there were some issues, and we've documented those. So forth. So those are the things that definitely communication is helpful. One more question?
Follow up to Bob's question. I didn't quite hear the answer. Will districts know by the end of next week definitively, or this week, before June 30th, so we know if they're going to have to reverse out some accounting they did?
Yeah, by June 30th is what we're planning to make sure that communication is out relayed.
So they can do whatever accounting things they need to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not the person that will be doing that, so I can't vouch for exactly when they're going to do that, but we're definitely meeting this week. What's that? It's next Monday. Right. We're meeting in 2 days from now to kind of finalize all of that. And so communicating that out shouldn't be that much of a delay. So, Okay, so this portion of the presentation was supposed to take 5 minutes. So it took us an hour and a half. So, almost. Anyways, so that means we're going to have to kind of be choosy on what we do next. So this slide here will just kind of quickly summarize some of what we've already said. Summative testing will be administered online as well as paper and pencil for those schools that are not ready to do it online. And reporting will be an advantage for those schools that are going to be administered online. So you'll have quicker turnaround on reports. And exactly what the reports are, that's something that we're working through. We are definitely going to do this in a collaborative way. We are definitely going to be polling a lot of you that are in this room as well as across the state about, as we look forward to reports for teachers, reports for students, what do those reports need to look like? The reports that you've been seeing in the past, from the older reports, we're pretty much going to set those aside. We're going to move forward and really develop reports that are useful to the teachers and useful for the parents, and so we're really looking forward to your help in guiding us with that. How much sooner?
Can I take that one?
I will let you take that.
I'm pretty excited about it. There's not much that we can get excited about sometimes in the assessment world. One of the things that we are working on and we will be developing this fall, but near-time reporting, okay? Near-time reporting means that for what the information that would be valuable to teachers about the content standards or targets or focus groups, so math, we know we've had focal points. That information will be available for those that test online. Near-time reporting, if it's multiple choice, it typically means within the same day. And if it's going to be our TE items, it will typically be next day.
Technology enhanced.
Technology enhanced. So compared to where we've been, now that doesn't mean you'll have scale scores, it doesn't mean you'll have performance levels, but for information that matters to the classroom teachers and where their students were with those standards, that's what we call near-time reporting. And so that will be available same or next day. So we're not looking at proficiency or scale scores, but something that will help with instruction. Yes?
To piggyback on that, do you have any idea how that will shift school improvement timelines? Because we do a lot of school improvement planning in the February, May timeframe.
No, but that's a question I will take back. One of the things we do on a weekly basis is we have a joint meeting with the Curriculum and Instruction Office and policy things, questions on where we're doing things to tie things together. We're trying to remove this and break down the silos that exist in the department, help students in districts. So
most buildings have to submit their plan to their districts prior to the end of their school year, so they can do their district plans. So
that's a pretty critical point. Yeah. So that's one we definitely want to take back. Before we leave today, I have business cards and questions like that. If you would email me so we can make sure, even not waiting for a summative from here, I would like to take those back because I think it's pretty important.
I send the PowerPoint to Julie.
Okay.
So
it has our contact
information on there as well on the last slide. And by the way, there's a lot of slides we're not going to be able to get to because of time. So all the things that we just talked about, the reporting, there is a slide specifically about that, some talking points. But pretty much what Pat just referred to, looking at the next day, the worst case scenario for all the items that can be scored electronically. For the items that are constructed response, that are writing and select, those types of questions, they have to go through hand scoring or other machine scoring processes that take longer than a day. So those aren't going to be immediately available in those reports. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about preparing schools and students at this point. We're going to switch gears. Say, okay, here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to do summative spring assessments. We're going to do some interim. How do we prepare? And so we're going to focus a little bit on the idea of technology-enhanced items. How many of you actually were involved to the point where you were maybe helping teachers get their labs set up with the technology, getting the software up and running, and actually maybe even played with some of the practice, the online tools training tests? How many of you have seen some of those things firsthand? Okay. There are some things, the online tools training, the slides, the pictures that you see at the bottom of the screen come right from that. And what I'm intending to do here is show you a couple examples. Obviously, the time has gotten away from us, so we won't be able to get into it as deeply. But we do want to talk about the fact that we are really moving in the direction of enhanced items because it does engage the student more in the assessment process. Survey we got back from the pilots and field testing, a large majority of the students just were more engaged. The teachers and administration, the test administrators noticed the students were definitely on task in more than they would have if they were doing regular multiple choice. Better measurement of student knowledge and skills. That's something that we're hoping to really drill down into more concrete abilities, student abilities and knowledge. That takes a lot of effort, in the assessment development process to really get the PE item to be measuring the correct things. So a lot of work goes into that. And manipulatives. And this is one thing that we might get a lot of feedback from you, and we heard some from the survey. There are some manipulatives that are, I don't know, digitally placed on the screen, like the math cubes and so forth. Some schools may not use the math cubes in their classrooms. So there are some things where students are looking at a manipulative that they're familiar with, which is a problem, right? So we're hoping that we'll adopt some standard manipulatives that perhaps schools will start maybe incorporating more so that they can become more prepared. But those are things that obviously we're going to listen to, and I'm not sure the process of selecting those types of manipulatives for the digital display. But the content area, I'm really not a content person, so if you're going to ask me questions about content, I'm just going to be talking about the technology aspect and how the students move through. So preparing schools for online testing, these are the things that you are doing, no less helping or doing yourself. We got the M-Tracks doing the survey of what you have in the schools, technology-wise. By the way, if you talk to schools, or maybe you're involved directly with this, if you are populating the data from M-Tracks, it would be great to keep this up to date as much as possible. I know the requirement is only once a year, but it would certainly help understand where we're at any time, especially after the summer purchasing, to kind of know where we're standing in terms of readiness. We have to actually look at school readiness for spring testing. We have to look at that early in the fall to determine who's going to be able to deliver online. So if we have more up-to-date information from using M-Tracks, that'll help schools be on the right track. If schools purchased 1,000 devices over the summer and all of a sudden became ready, we need to know that so that that school can actually benefit from the online testing. We already talked about the online field testing and pilot testing. Those are absolutely essential pieces to really understanding the logistics of the system. Schools may have been doing other testing. You already heard some of the other products that schools are using. That's good, but to really get familiar with the systems that the state is going to be deploying, that's really going to get you farther along in terms of getting ready and getting comfortable with the systems. Now, if you were doing the interim pilot this spring, you already heard mention of the TSM. The TSM is the Testing Site Manager Server, which is a component that is loaded at the district level, typically. And that's new. That's new to schools. And by the way, does everybody know the benefit of the TSM? Anybody want to share with me why would you have a server? It sounds like a lot of work to set up a server. But Jason, what do you want?
So my district with 1.5 megabit P1 that's saturated all day long can still take the test.
Okay, so we're not dependent on internet bandwidth issues. It really negates the bandwidth capacity problem by the fact that if internet becomes delayed or disconnected completely during testing, the testing site manager, which is basically a caching server, will pick up and can let the student finish testing. So it's really helpful, especially when you're talking about summative required testing, high stakes. Having that server is going to be the best thing to avoid those types of crises.
And our districts all know about that, or our ISDs install it, or where does that go?
That's the next thing, deploying and installing the software. This is something that we're going to be developing a process for you to understand exactly where to get the software, where to download it, how to install it, certifying it. So I think somebody, I don't know who, was it Mike or somebody said, we need a way to know if everything's running smoothly. Technology-wise, we need to make sure everything is running as it should be. And the certification, I put it in quotes, certify. We can't guarantee everything. We're all on this because we can test it in October, and then things change between October and April, and you need to test it again probably, and things might happen. Maybe a router will go bad during testing. You can't really plan for these things. So, but to the best of our ability, we're going to give you a plan that you can follow step by step and make sure that you are ready, configured, tested, you've gone through all the necessary steps, so you can actually go to your superintendent and say, we're ready. That's what we're going to do, and with a level of assurance, knowing that you always have those issues that come in. Internet goes down, switches go down, electricity goes down. All those things happen, and those things you can't avoid. And then communication. Communication has been something we've learned a lot, kind of improving those, making sure the technology folks are included. How many of you feel like you've been kind of left out of the loop a lot of the times in terms of these pilots and field tests? Well, maybe we've helped. We've improved already, but I know there's still some gaps. How many of you are familiar with the Educational Entity Master, EEM? Some of you are. We are using that a lot more in terms of using it communication-wise. Technology directors. There's a role in the system now for interim assessment coordinator, kindergarten entry assessment coordinator. Those are all new roles that we need schools to populate so that we can use those to communicate with regarding some of these different programs. But definitely the school and district technology coordinators. If those are not up to date, as we know, over the summer things happen, people move, switch jobs. So it's like a carousel sometimes. You need to have that up to date so that you can get the most current information.
Andy, did we answer your question, or is the question still out there about what do districts know and are aware of, right? So I think...
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it was just more about the test server. I haven't heard any dialogue in our tech directors meetings about that. And I'm just curious, are districts looking to install that at the district level? Are ISDs that serve as the internet service provider putting it at an ISD level? Where
it would, I can tell you a couple things right now, but we haven't signed a contract with the vendor.
Okay.
So I can't really get into too many details, but all I can say is it would need to be on the local area network. I wouldn't put it on the wide area network. I would put it on the local so that it's closer to the student. If you suspect, I mean, some schools have wireless connections between buildings and so forth. You might even want to put it in the building in that case, if you're depending on some internet connections that might be spotty.
Beyond providing the server, is there a fee for the software?
There's no fee for the software, okay. Right? And the server is called a server, but it really can be deployed on like your laptop. It doesn't require a massive server to work. So that's just...
I just have a general comment, more for Andy's information. And Mike Richardson can probably talk too about how we're being strategic in our regions. We understand our networks. We understand how our districts connect to our network. So we know that a district with 1.5 megs should have a TSM there. But we also have districts that have a gigabit of bandwidth. And we know that the likelihood that that's going to go down is just as great as the likelihood of the wireless network inside the school. So we're being strategic because TSMs can be shared across districts. You just have to plan how many students will be testing at the same time, what your network capacity is. So we're trying to deploy as few TSMs across our region as we can so that we know where the testing traffic's coming from at the head of our network so that we can identify that more easily rather than trying to identify it by application. So it goes into a whole strategic network management plan of how we deploy the TSMs versus sticking one in every building. Okay.
So as we design some of these processes, I would really love to have conversations with you since you have experience with those. Anybody else who wants to be involved in that, I'd like to kind of involve in some of that. Maybe some best practice guidelines, like Jason just mentioned. Definitely could use that assistance from you got a business card there. I'll share mine with you later. So,
a key
yes.
takeaway from Andy, though, is we definitely need to beef up our communication about the TSM, the value of it. And
we have to, yeah. First step is contract award. Then full on getting that out. I mean, a lot of schools are wanting to get the software installed on the images for the summer and so forth. Unfortunately, that's not possible. The reason is there's a new version coming out in August, September-ish, and by then your images will have to have been done and deployed. So there are network installation configuration things that you can use to deploy the packages and get them all set up. And again, we'll use some of our friends who've participated in the pilots to date and work on some documents that will guide you through getting that all set up. Technology readiness right now, as it stood on Friday, this is where we're at. 79% of schools are ready, 51% of districts. Now, I don't put a whole lot of stock in the district as much, because if even one school out of a district of 100 schools is not ready, the district is not ready. So it's really not a good measure. It's still important to understand that those districts would have a school not ready, but still 79% of our schools are ready based on the minimum standards. And we definitely want to go to the recommended. We want to push to the recommended. So as you upgrade your devices, that'll help. And of course, your testing experience will be greatly helped if you go to the next level of recommended specifications, not the minimum. This is the growth that we've seen. Some of you have seen this before from 2012 to 2013. Significant improvement, and hopefully we'll see even greater. Wonder what the next percentage will be this December. Can't wait. Okay? So this is the next step, is preparing students for online testing. And the first item I have here is the technology literacy for the young students. Even though they're not tested summative, summative testing, the K2 students, we want to make sure they're ready for the interim tests. We've actually developed a resource document that I'm curious if any of you have seen it, looked at it. Raise your hand if you've heard of this or seen this or read this document, K2 Resources for Tech Literacy. Any raise your hands? A couple? 3 or 4? This is just a few things that we started compiling. And frankly, it was designed to be a start. And those of you who just raised your hand, we would like you to help us in filling that out more. Are there free resources, free websites, software things that you found? Hopefully, free is best. We don't want to get to the point of recommending software that is going to cost money. We don't really want to do that at this point. But if there are things that you found best practice-wise that has worked, we want to enhance that document. And I'll go ahead and click it just so you can see what we're talking about.